Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying lunch and meeting people. The great buzz of conversation is going on out there. We're about to start our afternoon program, and I want to invite our great Americans for the Arts chair, chair of the Board of Directors, Abel Lopez, to join me as we present two of our leadership awards. Americans for the Arts, as we do these leadership awards, is very fortunate to have a leader like Abel take the helm of our Board of Directors. He's been a long-standing creative force for the arts in D.C. and in America because of all of the different organizations that he has helped with his board leadership. And as he approaches, I see he's already approached, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate all of our local arts agencies here, all of the local arts agencies that received grants from the National Endowment for the Arts. They're listed behind me. They should be right now. And for all of you who got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts in the past year, would you all stand? Great. How about ever? Anybody who ever got one, would you guys stand too? There you go. Thank you. We're going to get that money back to get more of those. I encourage you to all submit applications to let them know about your interest and the fact that that money is still important. And Michael Killoran and Dinah Walls from the National Endowment for the Arts are here with us, and they will be at the Meet the NEA session tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. in room 305 to meet with you about developing your own application to the NEA. They need to hear from you to know that they need to do more. Thank you, and with that, Abel Lopez.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Thank you. It's a real privilege to be the chair of Americans for the Arts, a board of directors, and also to be working with a great staff here at Americans for the Arts, as well as a very dedicated board of directors whom you met a few minutes ago when Bob introduced them, or asked them to stand up. They're true national leaders that live in your communities across the country. Our board, however, is only one set of great leaders who provide input and advice to advance this organization. And I wish to recognize and thank them as members of our field leadership councils for their work that they do on behalf of Americans for the Arts. Could the members of our State Arts Action Network Council please stand up, as well as the Arts Education Council, the Public Art Council, the Emerging Leaders Council, the Private Sector Council, and our state captains. Could you please stand up and be applauded at this time for your dedication and your service? They're a great part of our leadership group here at Americans for the Arts, and again, we thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of the organization, on behalf of artists, and behalf of arts communities around the country. And now on to our first awards. The rest will be presented tomorrow during the Town Hall Luncheon. These awards are presented each year in conjunction with this convention and recognize the achievement of individuals, organizations, or programs committed to enriching their communities through the arts. It is my pleasure to present first the Public Art Network Award. This award honors innovative contributions to and exemplary commitment and leadership in public art. The recipient of the 2013 Public Arts Network Award is Wendy Foyer. Wendy is a 30-year leader of public art and design programs, in particular art and transportation projects. She has been Assistant Commissioner for Urban Design and Art at the New York City Department of Transportation since its founding in June of 2007. Wendy was also the founding director of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority's Arts for Transit program and served as Director of Art and Design for almost 11 years, creating visual and performing arts programs for the subway and commuter rail systems, including over 600 stations serving 5 million people daily. She has worked on airport art programs and developed public art policies and design standards for programs across the country. So on behalf of the Americans for the Arts Board of Directors and the Public Art Network, I invite Wendy to come forward and accept this award.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. Can we shake your hand?
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah,
Pleasure.
And it's my pleasure to present the Selena Roberts Autumn Award. It is always presented to an individual working in arts management who has made a meaningful contribution to his or her local community and who exemplifies extraordinary leadership qualities. Unfortunately, that person, who I'll say who she is in a moment, is sitting on a runway at LaGuardia right now. But the recipient of the 2013 Selena Roberts Autumn Award is Kate Levin. And Kate Levin is the commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, which is the largest funder of the arts in the nation, supporting and sustaining New York City's cultural life through public funding for programming, operations, and capital improvements at nonprofit organizations throughout the 5 boroughs. Under the leadership of Commissioner Kate Levin and Mayor Bloomberg, the City of New York has maintained the largest cultural capital budget, providing over $2.8 billion for facility enhancement projects at cultural organizations across the 5 boroughs since 2002. They've reformed the city's Cultural Development Fund, CDF, the granting process, dramatically expanding access to funding for the city's cultural community. The city provides over $30 million to nearly 900 arts organizations through the CDF program each year. The agency has awarded more than $1.6 billion in programming support over the last 10 years. From Christo to Jean-Claude, Christo and Jean-Claude's The Gates, to Oliver Eliasson's The New York City Waterfalls, to Paul Ramirez Jonas' Key to the City, and Sing for Hope's pop-up pianos, the city is committed to supporting and highlighting major temporary public art projects which attract New Yorkers and international audiences to neighborhoods, again, across the 5 boroughs. Kate has ensured that cultural organizations anchor neighborhood revitalization projects in places like Coney Island, Harlem, St. George, Long Island City, and the South Bronx. So on behalf of Americans for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts, I am inviting in Kate's place Kathleen Hughes. Kathleen Hughes is the Assistant Commissioner, and Kathleen knows what she speaks about and what the city has done because she runs all of their grant programs, and Kathleen has been there for 3 decades. So Kathleen Hughes.
The awards back there? The award?
I pointed out to Kathleen that that's not just a thank you note, there is a check that comes with that award. So she said it would be in good hands over the weekend. I'm not sure what that means, but Abel.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Bob, and congratulations to Wendy and Kate. Those of us in the arts who have been working for years to demonstrate that the arts are core to building healthy, diverse, and engaged communities. We know the arts spur economic growth, connect citizens, improve education, and are key to the quality of life. So why does it seem that the arts are still the best kept secret in America? How can we more effectively tell our story so that decision makers and the public understand the true value that the arts play in their lives and their work? We've invited some pretty fantastic people to talk with us about that today. First up is Dr. Manuel Pastor. His research is focused on issues, Dr. Pastor is Professor of Sociology and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. He is the founding director of the Center for Justice, Tolerance, and Community at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and currently directs the Program for Environmental and Regional Equity at USC and co-directs USC's Center for the Study of Immigrant Integration. His research has focused on issues of the economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities and the social movements seeking to change those realities. He'll be available to sign his most recent book, Just Growth, Inclusion and Prosperity in America's Metropolitan Regions, right after this session. In it, he argues that growth and equity can and should be linked, offering a new path for U.S. economy seeking to recover from economic crisis and distributional distress. He is often called upon to shed light on recent U.S. demographic changes and their impact on our nation's future. Dr. Pastor. Please welcome Dr. Pastor.
Great. Bienvenido. Thanks. Thanks for that kind introduction. Yeah, I wanted to mention that I actually met one of your honorees this morning. I hadn't realized that I was actually on the elliptical right next to you, Wendy, this morning. If I had known you were so important, I would have sweated less in your direction. I apologize for that. So I've been given 15 minutes, and I've been asked to address demographic change in the future of America, economic shifts and uncertainty ahead, the implications for the arts, not just for commerce, but for self-expression and meaning. If that wasn't enough, I was asked to do an analysis of the arts salary information, including individualized arguments about why you should get a higher salary. I was asked to make comments on the recent NSA controversy about the telephones, not just commenting on the necessary balance between privacy and security, but on the absolute perfection of the fact that Ed Snowden's girlfriend is an acrobat and pole dancer. And then finally, given the news from last night, I was asked to talk about the potential intervention in Syria and whether we should arm the rebels or perhaps consider a cheaper route, which might be trying to paralyze the Syrian army by forcing them to listen to Congress re-debate Obamacare. It's a lot to do in what we in Spanish call a keynotito, a 15-minute keynote. So what I'll do instead is move to the middle and talk a little bit about some of these demographic changes. Before we get started, some of you who've seen me speak before know that I always say before I speak that while I'm speaking, my voice might get a little harsh or break. I actually have a speech disorder, spasmodic dysphonia. It's what Diana Reems has, Diane Reems, who's on NPR. I like to tell people, don't worry, it gets treated once a month with Botox, because that's how we treat everything in Los Angeles. So I was kind of struck, Jim might have as well, on the night that the president got reelected and we saw all of these commentators saying, oh my God, the country has changed, right? And I just wondered, where have you been? Now, I'm a demographer, so for me, the day that the census data comes out is a little bit like the opening of a play or an art show for most of you. It's incredibly exciting. And what we found when the last census came out was that in the last decade, the number of Latinos grew by 43%, that the number of Asian Pacific Islanders grew by 43%. A remarkable coincidence. I think they were coordinating. That the number of African Americans grew by 12% and the number of non-Hispanic whites by just 1%. And in fact, some of you may recall from the news yesterday that the census is now saying that more non-Hispanic whites are dying actually than being born. So when people look at those demographic changes, in particular this 43% growth rate for Latinos, they tend to think that that demographic change is due to what? Well, it turns out that's the actual answer, right? But most people think it's immigration, right? Which actually turns out to be wrong. Immigration is actually slowing into the country. Net migration from Mexico is 0. In fact, most of us in the know think it's negative, but you'll think we're crazy if we say that. So we say that it's 0. And it's 0 because the economy of Mexico has recovered better than our economy. Wages in Mexico are coming closer to our wages. But more significantly, 30 years ago, a woman over the course of her lifetime in Mexico would have 5 babies. Now the fertility rate in Mexico is 2.3. The fertility rate in the United States is 1.7. Coming together, we're going to have less immigration in the future. It's one of the reasons why we've had this immigration debate queuing up right now. So what is driving it is exactly what you were talking about, the change in our youth population. So this is the change in the last 10 years for folks under the age of 18. So one thing you'll notice is that the number of young whites actually fell by 4.3 million. Now, that does not mean that 4.3 million young white people died. We would have noticed that. It would have been reported on Fox News. And as Jim Messina knows, it would have been blamed on the president. It's that more people are moving into 19 and 20 than are moving into 1 and 2. So the net number goes down. Net number of young African Americans actually fell by 250,000. Some of that is redesignation into multiracial. But a lot of it is just that the growth rate for African Americans is about the growth rate of the country. For Latinos, the number of young Latinos went up by 4.7 million. The number of young Asian Pacific Islanders went up by 800,000. So that is what is driving the demographic change that's pictured in this graph right here, which shows you where the U.S. is going from 1970 into 2050. By the year 2043, the United States will be a so-called majority minority country, or as I like to think of it, all minority all the time. That is, all of us will be a minority. By the year 2019-2020, the majority of youth will be people of color, and probably next year, the majority of kids under the age of 5 will be people of color. So that's what's driving the demographic change. And what's interesting about the demographic change is we've actually seen it before. If you look at the share of non-Hispanic whites in the United States in the year 2000, it's about 69%, projected to be about 45% in 2050. That is basically the demographic change California went through between 1980 and 2000. So that 20-year period, really the next 50 years for the United States. And those were bumpy years for race relations in California. Proposition 187, the fight around undocumented immigration, fights around affirmative action, etc. But we've been through this before. In fact, I was living in California, I was at UC Santa Cruz, and I remember the day that California became majority minority. You know, demographers do that. They go, the 300 millionth baby was born today. His name is Jose. He lives in Pittsburgh. You're like, how did you know that, right? So that morning, I kept getting phone calls from reporters all day long saying, California's majority minority, it's majority minority, it's majority minority. What's it mean, what's it mean, what's it mean? Tone of anxiety in their voice. Finally, I said, I don't know. But we're having a salsa party at my house tonight to celebrate. In the spirit of the new California, everyone's invited. They just need to learn a new step. And part of what we're doing is learning a new step in terms of what does it mean to do our artwork in this regard, what does it mean to do community outreach, community organizing, what does it mean to do politics, what does it mean to do economics as this world is rapidly changing around us. And interestingly, it's kind of funny because there's sort of an end in a way to this process where we, you know, those of us in California think we're America fast forward. I know you just think we're arrogant. We are. But you know, it's interesting. Of the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the United States, what do you think is the only large metro area? Metro areas are like Pittsburgh and Baltimore and Denver and Atlanta. What is the only large metro area in the United States that did not see an increase in the number of Hispanic children in the last 10 years? Los Angeles. It's coming to the end of a process, an older population, etc. And you can see this in part by the fact that our share of foreign-born in California and in Los Angeles has been going down, and also that we've got a much more, this is the states of the United States arrayed by who's got the most settled immigrant population, people who've been in the country for longer than 10 years. So in California, about 75% of our immigrant population has been in the country for longer than 10 years. In fact, half of our undocumented population has been in the country for more than 10 years, very well integrated into the fabric. The only state with a more settled immigrant population is Vermont. And that's because they have like 2 immigrants, and they've been there for a long time. So if you're from Vermont, I apologize. You're more diverse than everybody thinks. You're less diverse than you think. So when people see those changes, sometimes they think those changes are happening in a way that's really what's happening is that California is not just leading, and they don't realize California is coming to the end of this process. They think that what's going on is that California is about to become 150% minority. And that will drive the rest of the country, right? There'll be like super people of color marching around the landscape, you know? I come for 1.5. So this is a process happening all over the country. This is from a set of maps we've done with Policy Link from Oakland. These are counties of the United States. Easy map to interpret. The browner the county, the browner the county. So darkest shade, greater than 50% people of color. The shade in between, 40 to 50% people of color. In 1980, what that looked like was the borderlands of Texas with Mexico, the Black Belt of the South heading up into D.C., the Hispanic and Native American areas of New Mexico and Arizona. But look how light California was, and in fact, Los Angeles was not yet majority people of color. 1990, the year 2000, the last census. And this is what the country looks like going forward, 2020, 2030, 2040. So that change is happening all over the country. It's coming to a theater near you. So, is that stuff interesting? Okay. That is not the most interesting statistic to come from the census. Here's the most interesting statistic to come from the census. I'm going to jump over this. The most interesting statistic to come from the census has to do with the age of the population. This is median age, half older, half younger. So for non-Hispanic whites, the median age, 42. For Asian Pacific Islanders, 35. For African Americans and Native Americans, 32. For Latinos, 27. 42, 27, 15 years, a generation gap. And it helps to explain 2 things. One is it helps to explain the demographic change that's going on. Because when you're 27, you're in prime family formation age. When you're 42, you think you're in prime family formation age. You might want to just get a sports car too, but it also helps to explain our politics. Many of you may recall that famous Tea Party sign, "Keep your government hands off my Medicare." And people sort of laughed at that because, you know, Medicare is a government program, right? But the other meaning of that was lift up the drawbridges just as a new generation is arriving. Protect every program that protects seniors, but what about what needs to happen for our youth population? And what we've been seeing in the United States is a growing social distance between the old and the young. And that social distance has implications. The state with the largest generation gap, Arizona. And think about the politics of that state. So what I want to do is I'm going to jump over this stuff. Oh, by the way, we talk about this in this wonderful book, Uncommon Common Ground, which is available in the bookstore afterwards. I will sign it personally for you. If you're not interested in reading, it's about to be made into a major motion picture. I was going to be portrayed by Antonio Banderas. I was very excited. Turns out it's George Lopez, but still, it will be a movie. So what are the implications of this for art? Those are my children. My son on the left is a musician whose backup career is as an actor. You guys infected him, okay? His name is Joaquin, or as we like to think of him, Expensive Hobby. No, actually, he's making it, which is amazing. On the right-hand side, my daughter, who's about to graduate from UCLA tomorrow. and she's getting a degree in cultural studies, and again, a big moneymaker, and she's a dancer, as you can tell. So the implications for the arts are to think about this changing demography moving forward, and what does it mean in terms of the new communities that you're going to be working with. But one of the things I want to say, and then kind of come to a bit of a conclusion on this, is that the arts community isn't putting enough money into these new communities. Arts philanthropy and arts needs to do more outreach, but part of it is that you also need to be thinking about what moves those communities. And it's not simply diversity, it's also the questions of social justice that motivate people to try to produce art. On the way coming up here, I had a chance to meet someone who's doing a project, Critical Exposure, which is doing photography with low-income kids that document their conditions and then use those to make change. That kind of social justice engagement moves people forward. And we need to be making an argument about the arts that's not just focused on the commerce part, which I think is important, but also focused on the meaning that it helps people make of their lives, the justice stories that it helps them tell, the ways in which it helps them build community. When my son was getting ready to go to UCLA as well, to theater school, the summer before he went, we took him on a trip, and my daughter and others on a trip to Hawaii. And in one of those really intimate male-to-male moments, meaning we weren't looking at each other, I asked my son, "Why are you going to theater school? What is it that you want to do with your life?" And he said, "I want to make things of beauty with my friends." And it's a perfect description of art, but in some ways it's also a perfect description of community building, of what we should really be looking for in terms of politics, making things of beauty, making a society of beauty with our friends together. One last point, because I'm conscious of the time, and I think I'm hitting the time just about perfectly. Oh, good. So then I want to say two last points then. One is about understanding these young people who are coming up. One of the things I think that's really key, how many of you work with young folks? Okay, and I hope this resonates with you. One of the things that's interesting is people, when they see this younger generation coming up, they think, God, that must be an angry constituency, right? So people on the right go, oh my God, it's angry minorities coming up, and they're going to want to take stuff, right? And people on the left are, yay, it's angry minorities, and they're going to want to take stuff, right? If you spend any time with these young people, they're aspirational. I mean, they really ought to be angry about the society we're leaving them, but really they're aspirational. They have, and I'm hoping the polling data that I've seen bears this out. I wonder what Jim will have to say about this, but you poll young African Americans and Latinos, they're amongst the most optimistic people in the country about what they think the future will look like, despite all the hardship, the data, the lack of opportunity. And their aspirations are not just individual, their aspirations are about making things of beauty with their friends, about making a better society, making a better America. And if we are to do that, what we've got to realize is that the issues of equity and inclusion, which often get left as the last thing you bring to the table, ought to be among the first things you bring to the table in order to engage this upcoming demographic, in order to paint a bigger picture, and in order to try to understand that we have a big task ahead of us in America. And that big task ahead of us in America is realizing that we are really all in the same society together. It's hard to do that when we've got the corrosive and divisive politics that are going on right now in this country. But one of the ways to do that is through making meaning together, and one of the ways in which we make meaning together is through arts, is through theater, is through music. The role you play in stitching people together across generations, across geographies, across ethnicity is actually crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pastor. Next, I would like to introduce Jim Messina. You probably know Jim best as the campaign manager of President Barack Obama's successful 2012 reelection campaign. With the guidance of technology's foremost leaders, Jim abandoned every step of a traditional presidential campaign and merged technology and politics in a way that was both unpredictable and unprecedented. His strategies established the modern presidential campaign. Google's executive chairman, Eric Schmidt, called it the best-run campaign ever. He has overseen and consulted on political campaigns across the country from Alaska to New York. He was also Deputy Chief of Staff to President Obama from 2009 to 2011. There, he was integral to the passage of the landmarks health care and economic stimulus bills. In January 2013, the Obama administration announced the launch of Organizing for Action, a new advocacy organization that will promote President Obama's policies with Jim as national director. Sounds like a perfect person to help us tell our story better. Jim?
Second point of personal privilege is a thank you to the Montanan art leaders in the room. The work you did to shape my childhood and provide art to rural Montana made me what I am today in part. So thank you for what you do every day. You know, corporate culture knows all about you. For the first time, the campaign started to too. And why that was important to my storytelling part of this speech is that we were able to have a specific story for each of you on why you had to come and support the president. We ranked everyone in this room from 1 to 100 on whether or not you'd support Barack Obama, whether or not you would vote, and more importantly, whether or not you were a persuadable voter. For all the polls bouncing up and down, do you know that only 8% of people were ever undecided in the Obama campaign? 92% of the people in this room decided on the very first day who we were voting for. And it was my job to turn out the good people and beg the bad people not to vote. But more importantly, to spend our time telling a story about how to do that. But the most successful was this thing called targeted sharing, which we matched our data with your Facebook friends and gave you friends of yours that were undecided. 6.6 million people used it in the last 96 hours to tell why they supported the president. And of their friends, 78% of them supported Barack Obama. He became the first president since Richard Nixon to get a majority of the undecided the last 5 days. And that's because we told a story about where we were and where we had to go. You all tell an amazing story every single day. Your challenge is to use the new technologies of today and tomorrow to tell that story in a very personal way. If you can do that, you will connect. People said for 2 years that we could never turn out youth the way we did in 2008. We ended up having a bigger youth turnout in 2012 than we did in even 2008. We expanded African American turnout in Ohio by 4% than even the historic 2008 election. Latino turnout was at the highest it had been in any battleground state, in all the battleground states, because we told stories. And we made this election more about you and less about us. And if we do that every single day, we'll get to a better place no matter what party you believe in, no matter what you think about the future. We'll get to a better place by telling stories. And that's what you do every single day. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both for your insightful comments and the information that you provided. And you both touched on how our nation is changing and our communities are changing, and how you are engaging this diversity of people in these communities in your own work. I was wondering if you might share some thoughts or ideas with our local arts agency leaders about how they can also engage the breadth of the communities that they're serving, which reflects the diversity of which you both talked about.
So I touched a little bit on that. I mean, I think that the work of making sure that arts programs stay in schools so they can enrich Jim's life, as apparently they did, to teach him the power of narrative. So I think that's something that we all know about. I do think that the big thing is beginning to figure out where art can be created. And one of the really interesting opportunities I hope that we're about to have is that comprehensive immigration reform will be passed. And if it is passed, 11 million people and all of their children are going to be able to come out of the shadows with a variety of different stories to tell, ways in which they want to be engaged, etc. And so I think thinking through whether or not the arts are really reaching out in a significant way to this population and understanding where they're at in terms of boxing matches and nail salons, and understanding that Univision, which is a really interesting network, as Jim knows. And how many of you watch Univision? You have no idea. I mean, like, what's interesting about Univision is it sort of tells the story of the community. It advocates for the community even as it delivers news, and often the news that comes into other mainstream media happens sort of a day after it happened on Univision, particularly with regard to these issues. So one of the big challenges, anyway, I see for the arts community in the next year or so is, what will your role be in terms of the day after reform? Because if we do get reform, the task afterwards is immigrant integration. And immigrant integration is going to involve many practical things: English as a second language, job training, parent engagement in the schools, but it's also going to involve getting people to feel part of the community through arts, etc.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that you need to fundamentally look at how you're delivering content. We didn't reinvent presidential politics because we thought it was fun. I did think it was fun, but because we had to, because the world had changed so quickly. The most likely populace to have a smartphone are now Latino voters, because they do banking on it, they check in with their friends and family, they're most likely to have 2 or 3 jobs. And so we had to program content directly to the cell phones, finding new ways to talk about youth. You know, I didn't, a year before the campaign, my team walked into me and said, we need to hire 8 people to do nothing all day but work on Pinterest. And I said, excellent, what the hell's Pinterest? And raise your hand if you know what Pinterest is. Look at all, yeah. So Pinterest is the #1 site for predominantly women, but I do some stuff there too, on clothes and fashion and culture. And so we did a bunch of things on Pinterest that we had no idea we were doing that. Vines are now the fastest growing thing on the internet. It didn't exist a year ago. So continuing to stay relevant to the ongoing discussion and the ongoing culture, and continuing to find ways to reach out to it and really become a reflection of the American populace is crucial for politics, but it's crucial for culture too, and art to be relevant in the next generation.
Before we open it up for a couple of questions, I want to ask you about going back to your storytelling, because we're always trying to tell the story about the impact and the value of the arts. From your perspective, do you have some thoughts about how we might do a better job of storytelling with respect to the arts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel passionate about this issue. And I think it's hard, right? You all are so busy in your day jobs, and there's so many 17 different things coming at these people. I think, though, it goes back to what Manuel was saying, is finding the new culture of America, and it's what you do every day, right? Your theater company and taps into this rich vein of America that is underfunded from the numbers that you showed. And to do that, we have to have more resources to tell those stories. But I don't think it's a typical lobbying campaign that says, we got $1 billion last year for the NEA, next year we want 1.1. It is telling the story to members of Congress and the greater community on why NEA funding puts a violin concerto in Glasgow, Montana, near the Canadian border, and how that makes everyone's life better. And how the success stories of poor kids like me, and you grew up to have great careers because we had some enriched cultural experiences. Talking about those stories and getting it out of the abstract and out of political terms and getting it into very personal terms will make a much bigger difference.
So if I might comment on that too, I mean, it really gets to a strand that I think the Obama campaign captured in 2008 and tried to come back to in 2012. And there's a big debate in sort of the community organizing world with regard to interest-based organizing versus values-based organizing. And you need to meet people's interest, but you need to resonate more profoundly with their values, because they can meet their interests in multiple ways. So for me, the big warning for the arts community is to be making the argument about the economic impacts of the arts and all of that sort of commercial possibility, but not lose sight of the fact that really what matters for arts is that it's our way of making meaning, describing the world finding connection with one another, that it's really about values. If you think about one of the most successful social movements in the last year and a half or so, it was the DREAM Act students, right? There was a sort of interest-based argument there, which is, here are these kids, they came to the country when they were young, they grew up as Americans, and we spent all this money on their education, shouldn't they be allowed to work so we could get some of the fruit of their productivity? And they made that argument, but more importantly, they made the argument that they were dreamers, that they fit in deeply to the American dream. They borrowed a trope from the LGBT movement about coming out, that the way that you could be unafraid in the world was by coming out and demonstrating who you were. And they were willing to borrow from the student sit-in movement, the civil rights movement. They really tapped deeply into American values. And I don't know whether people in the White House were surprised, but when the Dreamers combined their values-based organizing with enough really good legal research to show that the Obama administration could do deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, last summer, what was surprising was there was almost no negative reaction from anyone when the president made that move. And it was the first signal that people were open to comprehensive immigration reform and it might be able to go through. And how did they do it? They told a story. Those individual young people got up and talked about coming to the country. They talked about growing up here. They talked about their dreams, their desires to contribute, the notion that they were aspiring Americans. That's what moved stuff forward, the way in which they crafted a narrative and a story that deeply tied into our values and not just our interests.
Great, thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question, do we have? You'll just stand up. Over here. No? No one? Okay. Great. Anyone else? Over here? Are there two mics? Okay. There's one.
Sure. My question's for Mr. Messina. I recall Barack Obama's acceptance speech, and there was a part when he said, "That was you. You did that. You were the ones that helped bring that back." And I was wondering if that was connected to your concept of storytelling and reflecting on how it was everyone else's story, his story, and bringing everyone else's stories together. If those two, if the acceptance speech was connected to that theme.
Absolutely. Look, this, he said repeatedly, this is never about me, it's about you. And that collective story of us became, the secret of the 2012 campaign. I totally agree about the Dreamers. The Dreamers movement had very little to do with statistics and being right on the issue. They were right on the issue. It was about stories. It was about all of us together. And the more we told stories, we did a bunch of Latino media in the campaign, and none of our commercials were narrator done. They were all some of our young organizers who worked for us on the ground, telling their story about why they were doing this and why their world was getting better because of Barack Obama. And those stories, were the reason why we were able to win with, a larger margin than people expected, because people accepted our vision of the future. And that's what he was talking about that night.
Great. Was there one more question?
Thank you for both of your comments this afternoon and the inspiration. I have a question that keeps me up most nights, or at least some nights. And that's, across the people and the organizations and with our AFTA network that are represented here in the room, we're all, I think, putting more of those resources and tools into practice. We're using data to make a more compelling case. And at the end of the day, the work of our groups and our artists and the communities that we serve give us amazing stories to tell. And so I think today we're so much better positioned than we have been. And I'm wondering what, though, it will truly take to make the arts an incredibly contagious movement in our country when we have such competing interests and drama and turmoil. Is it that we just continue to be relentless in all of the actions that we've been putting into play? Or is there one critical collective thing that we could all do together that would really make people stand up and care and stand up for the arts?
Jimmy?
Well, I would say a couple things. I've spent a lot of time studying movements, and I think that movements occur because of two primary things. One, there's an injustice that needs to be rectified, and we have to figure out how to play into that in this fight. But way more importantly, when people want to take collective action together because that movement reflects them. Barack Obama's election in 2008, when he started from way behind and ended up winning the presidency, wasn't about him. In the end, we all saw ourselves in him. It's why so many people had such high expectations for the first 4 years, right? Because people desperately wanted whatever they cared deeply about, and they found a movement in Barack Obama. That's what the Dreamers were about. That's what the gay marriage campaigns are about. People want to live in a better society that more reflects their values. And so we have to find a way to make arts pass those two tests, because right now it is seen in a different place, in an incredibly culturally enriched place, but not under attack, not as something that's not getting done. I do think that the numbers that you talked about, the fact that there's some real injustice going on out there in some of the communities not being funded, can be a piece of this. But art also has to speak to a broader, collective wish for where we want our world to go. And when it does that, it'll become relevant.
Yeah, three things with one preface. The preface is, if anybody tells you there's a silver bullet, don't trust them. There's never really a single answer to do this stuff. So three things to add to what Jim said. The first is to not think about lifting up the arts just for lifting up the arts. There's a great quote that Van Jones, who used to work in the White House for a short while, said about Martin Luther King, which is that Martin Luther King did not say, "I have an issue." He said, "I have a dream," right? And so too often we're sort of like, what is our issue, right? And what is the issue that we're working on? It's the arts, instead of thinking about this broader kind of collective story of social justice, of opportunity. I'm struck by the fact that you've got 3 poor kids here who were helped by public schools to be able to move forward, sitting on the dais in front of you. So how do we talk about what is much bigger that we're building together, of which the arts is a piece, instead of just lifting up the arts? I know it's hard to do because the arts feels very starved, but making yourself more a part of an ecosystem of change rather than the issue, I think can be very helpful. Second thing, and I think Jim would came through in part of what Jim was saying, and I think if he had more time he'd speak about it more, is that young people see themselves not as consumers but as creators of content. So this idea of just delivering content to them rather than delivering opportunities for them to create content, if you really want to engage this new group of people, you have to think about content creation. We did a study around the digital divide in low-income communities, and we went to community technology centers, and we were thinking the kids were going to be trained in technology and be ready for the jobs of the future. What we found out was the way you got the kids in there was by letting them know they could tell their story. And if they found that they could tell their story, and then they wanted to learn HTML to put it up on the web, or they wanted to be able to learn Final Cut Pro to cut a video that they were doing and mount it, etc., if they could tell their story, they would learn the technology. This young generation is really about the creation of content and not just the consumption of content. And then finally, what the arts really can play a role in is human connection. Through looking at things of beauty, but also, as I said before, creating things of beauty with your friends. And that's got some broader implications, again, with this tied to community organizing. One of the tropes of the 2008 campaign, borrowing from Camp Obama and Marshall Gans, was this notion of the story of self to the story of us to the story of now, all about storytelling. But it was about people making the connection from their own story to other people's stories, and then to what we needed to do now to make it possible for people to realize their dreams. So focusing in on those human connections, thinking about how you're part of a broader movement to make a better country, that I think can help.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your time and for your commentary. It's really great to hear about the storytelling, not only in your lives, but also your observations about how we can tell our story better. We want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. Dr. Pastor will be in center stage signing his book. We want to congratulate again Wendy and Kate Levin for their awards. And we want to thank the artists, Cello Fury and Texture Contemporary Ballet, again for their work and their artistry here at this conference. And we ask you again to remember that tonight there's the opening night party at the Warhol Museum. Please, will be walking maps in the lobby for you if you need to find your way, or look for the celebrities that will also tell us where to go. Thank you again, and enjoy the afternoon. I look forward to seeing you in the hallways. Thank you.